international student advising centers in more than 170 countries. EducationUSA is officially a branch of the Office of Global Educational Programs in the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs. Please type your questions below in the chat box and we will address them at the end of the presentation. Let's get started. Lindsay?
Great. Thank you, Julia and AACRAO, for the invitation to join Fred and Jennifer in today's webinar on such a critical topic. As many people may be aware, NACAC has been engaged in this conversation for over a decade and shifted our policy based on member feedback to permit institutions to work with agents several years ago. I'll spend the next 15 minutes or so walking through this history as well as our current resources to help shape best practice, which will hopefully provide a good overview and context to what Jennifer and Fred will present. So in May of 1937, a group of institutions representing the Midwest College Conference decided that a formal organization at the national level should be established in order to develop common admission practices, which turned into a member code of ethics, which is an essential characteristic of any profession. Today, NACAC represents more than 1,500 members in over 50 countries. We represent at the high school level those serving as college counselors or university advisors. At the college and university post-secondary level, we represent practitioners who work in recruitment, admission, enrollment management. We represent independent educational consultants as well as organizations that help the professionals engaged in helping students transition. And for those on the call who may be focused on graduate recruitment, we are a solely undergraduate focused organization, so from high school to post-secondary education transition. Within NACAC, we have 23 regional affiliate organizations, including International AC, which really focuses on the international student mobility of recruitment and admission. And these 23 state and regional affiliates really help to bring context on a local and regional level to the work that we do. And sorry, my screen just changed. Oh, here we go. So NACAC's Code of Ethics relative to incentive compensation, the use of incentive compensation by U.S. colleges and universities to recruit U.S. citizens has always been prohibited by the association's Code of Ethics and remains that way this day. And this is largely due to the fact that it is also prohibited by the Higher Education Act of 1965, which was amended in 1992. However, there is an exception for students who are not eligible for U.S. financial aid. Given that the increasing influence of globalization on higher education, there was a call around 2010 from NACAC members on NACAC leadership to determine whether the longstanding provision within the association's principles banning per capita remuneration should apply equally to domestic and international recruitment. So here we see the timeline, which I'll briefly walk through regarding NACAC's engagement around the topic of commissioned-based agents. NACAC established the Commission on International Student Recruitment in 2011 to address long-running controversy over the use of commissioned agents to recruit international students and potential problems arising from such arrangements. Key issues considered by the Commission included an exploration of institutional policies and practices for the recruitment of international students in light of a well-established principle for admission practice, obstacles institutions face in the recruitment of international students, federal policy changes facing U.S. institutions wishing to engage in international recruitment, and the report is publicly available still on NACAC's website, and I encourage everyone to take a look. And in the opening, you will see who made up the commissions. And it was a balanced membership representing those both for and against the practice, 28 professionals, including several from associations, as well as critical experts in the field of both counseling and recruitment of students. The concerns really centered around the following key points. First, in a domestic regulatory context, the fact that the use of commission payment as a method of compensation has historically fostered incentives that result in predictable problems, particularly widespread abuse in federal student aid programs. Second, and in my opinion most important, the risk to students as well as to institutions. High-pressured sales tactics, misrepresentation, lack of transparency, reputational risk, bias in guidance. And number three, the question as to whether it's appropriate to pay for a student's enrollment if the student or parent are unaware that this is happening and unaware that they may be steered toward different schools based on this commissioned arrangement. Yet, there was an understanding among many in the field that agents were used in other countries' recruiting strategies, that agents can help students and families often in their local language. Agents were, at the time, currently in use by many U.S. institutions despite the prohibition, and agents should be held accountable to standards of professional knowledge and quality. And so as detailed in its final report, the Commission concluded that while NACAC should remain cognizant of the potential negative effects of commissioned recruiting, the widespread use of this method by institutions around the world for international recruitment necessitated acknowledgement by the association and required an adaptive focus on promoting best practices. In light of today's conversation and the State Department's recent shift in their policy, I do think it's critical and important to note that within the Commission's report in 2013, there is a focus on EducationUSA's strong opposition to the practice at that time, as it was called out in the report. And primarily, it stated that the policy for EducationUSA as to why they would not work with agents was because agents only worked and represented select universities. It restricted options for students, and that it wasn't an option for all students due to financial barriers to engaging with some agents that may charge students and families fees. So of course, interested in Fred's portion of this conversation to talk about the shift in light of what was stated back in 2013. So going back to the timeline, it is important to note that NACAC's Code of Ethics is an evolving document, and it is reviewed on an annual basis. Changes are proposed and voted on by the NACAC membership. And over the years, since the report of the Commission was released, there were subsequent changes each year, and these changes continued to refine what was recommended by the Commission, and it really focused around three concepts: accountability, transparency, and integrity. And it wasn't until our latest Code of Ethics, as voted on in September 2017 by the membership, where a section was dedicated to the use of commissioned agents, and all of these practices were now required practices, whereas before, in our version of the Code of Ethics, there were both mandatory and best practices. In 2017, this entire section focused on requirements of institutions working with agencies. Due to the focus over this last decade on this recruitment strategy, NACAC regularly conducts research on the topic. And consistent with other studies in the field, we've found that about a third of NACAC member higher education institutions work with agents. So that's the blue part of the pie that you see, so more than a third. And then a quarter are considering working with agents. And so because of this, again, in the development of the latest Code of Ethics, it was very clear among both those members who developed the new Code of Ethics as well as those who voted it into acceptance that NACAC had a role and responsibility to play in helping to make the practice more transparent for the benefit of students. And you might ask why transparency matters. And For many colleges and universities, the protection provided by being transparent outweighs the proprietary interest, and the practice safeguards institutions against claims of partnership and from unscrupulous agents, as well as helps prevent students from being misled by such agents. And so without going into too much detail, this is the section of the new Code of Ethics, which is also publicly available on NACAC's website, dedicated to the use of commissioned agents in international student recruitment. There's a guiding principles and rationale for what those who created this code and what was adopted by our members felt was important, and why agency use was a critical strategy for many institutions in recruiting international students. Ultimately, there's a section for what agents must do and what institutions must do, and for due to timing, I will not go into too many details, but ultimately it is the institution's responsibility to ensure that the agents that they work with are abiding by what is required of agents per NACAC's Code of Ethics. And it really does have to do with increasing the transparency, making sure that institutions are accountable and monitoring the actions and acting on misconduct, and disclosing the relationships so that students are able to identify if an agent is legitimately working with a NACAC member institution. It is optimistic to see that in our research, the data is suggestive of a trend that good practices, as encouraged by NACAC and other organizations like AIRC, as Jennifer will speak to, are being adopted. These are things such as how you vet and create contracts with agents, how you train your agents, how you basically see them as an extension of your staff. And again, I think one of the more controversial pieces as we brought these new requirements into our Code of Ethics was the piece on listing agency contacts on your student-facing website. And I've just received from our research team that this last year has increased to 27% of colleges reporting that they are now listing agency contacts on a student-facing website. So this is promising to see, and we'll continue to monitor these best practices. In order to assist institutions who want to engage with commission-based agents, NACAC has been instrumental in creating resource guides and materials that institutions can use to help shape their strategy to ensure that they are doing things with accountability, integrity, and transparency. And so in both 2014, 2015, and again in 2018, we have resources available to institutions. The one on the left, Trusted Sources, is a student-facing guide available in 5 languages, which basically try to raise awareness of commission-based agent practices to students and families who are considering working with an agency. Good practice, bad practice, what you are responsible for as a student applying to colleges and universities. The Commissioned Agents in NACAC's Code of Ethics series is a 6-part series that breaks down from kind of legal and accrediting requirements related to agent usage, to vetting, to contracts, to training, to assessing students who are recruited by commissioned agents, as well as member perspectives from the field of institutions who have worked with commissioned agents. So I invite you to check those out as well. One of the other trends that we're tracking, given that we do work both with high school, secondary schools, and post-secondary schools, is the trend in the growth of international students at U.S. high schools. And it is often the case that international students and secondary schools engage with commissioned agencies to recruit these students. So we were curious from the NACAC member perspective, so we are kind of at the tail end of a student's experience, being the college counseling aspect. We asked if counselors were aware that their international students were working with agents. through the process, because we often hear that the agents that brought students through to the secondary school often continue to work with those international students through the college admission process. So we include questions like this to raise awareness, to encourage counselors to engage with their international students about their advisement. I think one of the most important things is that we are working with college counselors in the U.S. to better understand their international student populations, to support them well through the process, that we have a resource dedicated to counselors of international students attending high school in the U.S., and that we're also both Jennifer and myself, are part of the Council on Standards for International Education Travel Advisory Board on international student recruitment to secondary schools, that's looking to do what NACAC and others have done to provide standards and best practices around commission-based recruitment to the universities, that also is replicated at the secondary school level. So I will end my comments there and look forward to addressing any questions at the end. So we'll turn, I believe, now to Jennifer.
Thanks, Lindsay. Thank you for that segue, and thank you all for participating in the webinar today, and thanks to AACRAO for hosting. So you'll find through this presentation that AIRC standards and our guidelines for institutions do align with NACAC's, interestingly, and in fact, our founding also paralleled some of the reasons why NACAC was founded back in the 30s. Around 2008, a group of educational leaders recognized the level of hesitancy around the use of agents, particularly with regard to ethics and transparency. So they realized, though, that they had been recruiting with agencies, and they knew of other countries that had been recruiting with the assistance of commission agents for some time. So they thought, it might be a good idea to kind of create something that could build a level of trust around the use of agencies. So we're a little bit over 10 years old now. Our overall mission is to safeguard the interests of international students and enrolling institutions through ethical standards-based recruitment strategies. So I will provide a context for the development of AIRC and a description of its programmatic offerings and resources to help you investigate your own recruitment strategies in my session today. So AIRC is a 501c3 nonprofit member organization. We are registered as a standards development organization, an SDO, which means that our members have come together in a recognized process to formulate standards around best practice, and we use the standards as
Jennifer?
secondary institutions, pathway programs if they affiliate with an accredited institution, secondary schools, and student recruitment agencies themselves. However, they must have gone successfully through the AIRC certification process in order to be a member of AIRC. Right now, we have approximately 380 members. These include about 80 agencies from around the world that are certified, and typically from year to year we have 10 to 12 agencies that go through the process or get recertified in the process, and we do have about 12 agencies in the process right now. So you might have heard AIRC, aren't they the agency group? I think that the perception is that the main thing we do is around agencies, and it is still a primary function of the organization. However, besides the certification of agencies, which is recognized as the U.S. quality standard, we are an organization that focuses on all aspects and methods of recruitment of international students. So you might be interested to know that, we have members that actually do not recruit with the assistance of agencies. They join AIRC in order to become informed around all the different methods, the best practice, the research, the trends, and all aspects of recruiting. And in fact, AIRC promotes best practice and an informed strategy that is a balance of commission agencies and other methods of recruitment. We're kind of recognized in the U.S. as the agency group, but we're also recognized as the only independent certification based on a rigorous accreditation model, which I'll review briefly. Lindsay made reference to a little bit, why would institutions use agencies when they have, recruiters and international admissions staff? Agencies can be culturally accepted in any region or city in the world that might be a little bit more accessible to the students and families because they're local, because the native language is in play, because the the marketing style would also be native to that market. They're a resource on the ground, for international recruiting institutions to have access to students, schools, counselors, etc. So it's one other thing you could consider as part of your portfolio of tools. So let me just tell you a little bit about the AIRC certification process, because if you are not already looking at using agents, you can consider perhaps if you want to start out, looking to engaging with an AIRC certified agency. So let me tell you what that involves to give you an idea. So you might recognize the kind of outlines of the hallmark of our process as being similar to the accreditation of higher education. And indeed, it is patterned after the accreditation of higher education in the U.S. So basically, there's a couple other things that we do in addition to the basic accreditation model, and that is the first one what you see is the FCPA report, which stands for Foreign Corrupt Practices Act report. This is a due diligence background check that we order. It's very high level. We selected this report because it does a native language check. It checks specifically for corruption and conflict of interest between governmental and business sources. It checks over 200 databases, including data on, terrorism, legal liabilities, and, it's pretty common that something will come up in the report because it'll also show social media posts. So it's good because then we can go to the agency and find out more about it and what it was all about and if it was resolved and how it was resolved and if it's something we need to worry about. This report has actually excluded some agencies from going on through the process, and our members are it's very important to many of our members' institutions that we have this first step. Agencies do have to meet a basic eligibility of being in business for at least 2 years, and they have to have a minimum level of student placement, and that placement has to be at least 18 months ago because we want to make sure that the agency is actually following up with students after they've enrolled. The agency fills out a self-evaluation report. This is what's common to higher education accreditation, and they must answer and document how they're meeting the AIRC standards. There's 40 standards. Then AIRC arranges for a trained site reviewer called an external reviewer to make a verification site visit. It's like an audit. And this is really what stands us apart from other accrediting or certification groups around agency use, is we're the only organization that conducts site visits. There is an independent certification commission which reviews the agencies a few times a year for certification decisions and outcomes. And then after an agency is certified, they must complete annual reporting. There's compliance checks, for example, maybe on standards that were substantially met but not fully met. And another hallmark is this whole public comment and complaints process. So when an agency is approved to go through the process, it's announced publicly, that's listed on our website. And then if you ever have a concern, it doesn't even have to be, you do not have to be an AIRC member. These are complaints we take from the public. We even take complaints that arise through media. We do look into whether this is a standards violation, and if need be, a whole investigation process will start out. One other thing about agencies, for some of you, you might not really fully grasp that even if you do not have a partnership with an agency, they are probably recruiting for your school. So the more transparency and accountability we can build into the process, I think the better we can all feel about it. The other thing is that many people talk about how agencies must be in it for their own self-interest. And this is true, of course, they're businesses. They are trying to make a living. However, it's a highly reputational business. So they really need to be concerned about their reputation in their market. So you will find very high reputational agencies that are helping to place students at schools from which they receive no compensation. And they're doing that because they want to serve the best interest of the students. And hopefully you'll find with the AIRC agencies this is often the case. So the AIRC standards and vetting for agencies, I talked a little bit about the process, and I just wanted to touch on some of the variables in the AIRC standards. So as I said, there's 40 AIRC standards, and all the blue underline items that you see are hyperlinked so that you can click on these in the slide presentation that was sent to you earlier. But the kind of the main areas are around transparency, truth, and honesty. We want to make sure there's systems for accountability both to the student, the family, and to the enrolling institution, that there's integrity and ethical and responsive operations from the whole business setup to its mission to how it hires and trains people. We want to make sure there's transparent fee structure and that there are refund policies. A refund policy could be no refund, but we want to ensure that there's policies and an understanding around the fees of refund policy structures. There needs to be a high level of knowledge around U.S. education. There needs to be highly trained staff. We want to ensure that the agency is doing everything it can to ensure that the documents provided by the student and the family are authentic. And we want to ensure that there is continuous improvement so that an agency is continually surveying its clients both on the student and institutional side as a means to improve its practices. And then I wanted to go over a few resources for you, similar to Lindsay, what she had, and I have some of the NACAC items here as well. But so these are resources for recruiting strategies, for both general overall strategy for recruitment, but also for finding agency partners. A key resource for anybody who wants to recruit internationally is to really study and dig down into the IIE Open Doors report that comes out each year to really understand the trends. And then you really should look to your campus for your own faculty's expertise and contacts and both your domestic and international admission strategies. The resources for finding and vetting agencies include the AIRC Certified Agency List, agency matching companies. These are companies which will assist you to meet face-to-face with potential agency partners, and those include ISEF, BMI, and FPP Media. There are others, but these are some of the big ones. The U.S. Commercial Service is actually a key resource for you as institutions and others. They provide many services to help you understand methods and strategy around recruiting students to your campus. The Gold Key program is just one example, but they also will assist you with other events. And they will also introduce you to agencies that they have vetted in addition to AIRC certified agencies. The AIRC annual conference is a great way to meet other professionals in the field, to network with them, to share best practice, and to also meet AIRC certified agencies if you choose to, if you want to meet them. Only AIRC certified agencies can come to our events. FELCA stands for the Federation of Educational Language Consulting Associations, and this is an umbrella group that each country, for example, has agency associations. So in Brazil you have BELTA, in Japan you have JEOS, and in Korea you have COSA. And these are self-regulated and monitored agency associations. They might have their own standards, they might have their own kind of barriers and rules for entry, and it's a good resource for you to investigate when you're going into a country. If you want to talk to agencies, and perhaps there isn't any AIRC agency in that area, you can look into the FELCA groups. I also recommend looking into the other English language speaking countries that are recruiting internationally, and they've been doing it for longer than we have, so they're great resources. Australia in particular has had rules around transparency ever since they've established the ESOS Act. And so what this means is that any Australian university that's recruiting with agencies, and they all do, 100% of the Australian universities do, they must list their agency partners on their website. So if you are thinking about working with a large agency that does recruit for multiple countries, and Australia is one of them, you can verify that they are working with the Australian universities. And the reason why this is interesting is because in Australia, the universities are accountable for the actions of their agents. So it would be less of a risk for them to work with an agency that's highly ethical and reputable because they are the ones that are accountable. And then, of course, talk to your colleagues to get references for agencies. Just a few more, and then it'll be turned over to Fred. So AIRC has a best from our website, and it's also available here. EducationUSA resource, understanding a market and for
Jennifer, you're starting to break up over the phone line. Luckily.
Okay. Well. Okay, I'm wrapping up, so hopefully, okay. And then the NAFSA guides, the NAFSA articles, the AIRC conference, as I mentioned. And then a new thing that you should be aware of is the AIRC course in International Student Recruitment and Enrollment Planning. This is a certificate course for professionals who want to really dig in and understand every aspect of international strategy for their school. And of course, here is my contact information. I'd be happy to tell you more about any of these things. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Fred. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thanks to AACRAO for the opportunity to be here to speak about EducationUSA and the Department of State and our current environment and policy on our centers engaging agents. The context is, of course, very clear to everybody. The economic impact that international students have on the United States, $42 billion a year, over 450,000 jobs in the United States that depend on international students. And so the context is one that is, of course, extremely important to us as a country. Of course, the global competition for international students has developed quite a bit. And if you just look at the figures between 2001 and 2017, you'll see that the number of globally mobile students went from 2.1 million students to 4.6 million in those years. The United States share of those students actually dropped somewhat by 4% from 28% to 24%. And that's something that we have to be aware of. It's a great thing that the pool is expanding, and it's a wonderful thing for public diplomacy that students have the opportunity to study in other countries. It makes the world a safer place. On the other hand, we also want to make sure that the United States position is safeguarded and is at least stable in that scenario. And you can see that in recent years, while we are clearly still the top host of international students, we've hosted over 1 million students for the third year in a row now, we have seen a trend over the past 3 years, starting in 2015-16, of a decline in new enrollments. And 2 years ago, we saw a 3.3% decline. Last year, we saw a 6.6% decline. And so this has been going on for some time, but it's a trend that we take note of. And EducationUSA's purpose at the Department of State is, of course, to make sure that students know about opportunities to study in the United States, how open and welcoming U.S. higher education is, and the fact that there is an unmatched number of amazing institutions, 4,700 institutions, that could potentially welcome international students. We promote them all over the world, and so we constantly have to be asking ourselves, how are we doing that? Can we improve the way we do things? What could we do better? The United States clearly still holds a competitive advantage. You can tell that, as a destination, we are extremely attractive. And you can also see that we have a lot more capacity to host international students. Currently, the number of accredited higher education institutions is over 4,700. You'll see that in our competitors, those numbers are far lower. We host only 5.5% of students in the United States are international students. We have a lot of capacity to grow. And I think the figure that surprises me the most every time I read it is that 70% of those 1 million students studying in the United States attend only one of 300 institutions in Texas, California, or New York. That's homework for all of us. That means that there are a lot of institutions that are not hosting or who could host more international students, and EducationUSA's whole purpose is to promote all of those 4,700 accredited institutions. And also, I want to point out very strongly, to promote the student's best interest, to find the right home for each student, to help that student identify where she or he can succeed, and to make sure that there's a good match. And so it's clear that we can do that better because there's a lot of capacity in higher education to host more students. At the Department of State, of course, we have a lot of programs that support international student mobility. You, of course, know these names: Fulbright, Humphrey, teacher exchanges, YALI, the FLEX program, and we have a lot of interest. We are trying to make sure that we link everything we do in terms of public diplomacy and outreach also to promoting U.S. higher education and making sure that our institutions are first and foremost in people's minds when they consider their study possibilities in the United States or around the world. To that end, EducationUSA, as Julia said earlier on, is based in over 480 countries. We currently have 436 advising centers in 180 countries, over 550 advisors, and they are engaging students in all kinds of ways. They're engaging them through social media, in person, at events. They're talking to their teachers. They're engaging them on the web, email. We're trying to be as flexible as possible. And the reason that we're in 180 countries and not just in countries that send a lot of students is, of course, related to the fundamental public diplomacy message that the United States wants to share one of our best resources with the world, that we are creating relationships with people in every country, that we want them to benefit, and that together we make the world a better, a safer, a stronger place. People go home to their countries enriched, strengthened, and they establish relationships with the United States and with Americans that will last a lifetime. And we are convinced about that, and our model is absolutely not changing in any way. What we do have to do is make sure that we are capitalizing on all the resources that we have as a sector. And many of you, our listeners, will know that EducationUSA and the Department of State had issued guidance, as Lindsay mentioned, that our centers would not work with commission-based agents for a time. We have revised that, recognizing that we have to work with the full array of institutions, organizations, and individuals that advance opportunities for qualified international students to study in the United States. It simply is not tenable for us to exclude a big sector of those organizations and people who are promoting study in the United States. And in doing so, we are aligning ourselves much more closely with our colleagues at the Department of Commerce, who have always had a policy to work with agents, and so we're trying to be more aligned. This doesn't mean that we are changing anything about the way we are fundamentally doing business. We're still focused on strict ethical practices in promoting all accredited U.S. colleges and universities, and also advancing students' individual interests in identifying institutions at which they are best positioned for success. So everything we do is going to be focused on those areas. However, recognizing that there are a lot of organizations, institutions, and individuals that are also working to promote U.S. higher education, and we need to make sure that we are flexible in engaging them as well. I would say that we want to make sure that our centers are able to make decisions on a case-by-case basis because of the press of business. So what we are going to be doing is saying that centers can engage with recruitment agents that have been identified by U.S. higher education institutions as their representatives overseas, and that on a space available basis, they will incorporate them onto events. Our priority will still go to representatives of accredited U.S. higher education institutions. However, as capacity allows, we will then incorporate others absolutely to the greatest extent possible in relevant events. And centers, of course, our centers are at a wide variety of institutions. Some are housed at U.S. embassies and consulates. Some are housed at Fulbright commissions, at binational centers, at universities or NGOs. So you have a wide variety of centers, and you have centers that have different capacities. We have 3 different levels of centers. We have full centers, standard centers, comprehensive centers, as well as just reference centers. So a reference center probably won't have an advisor, but it will have materials for students to use on their own. That goes all the way up to a comprehensive center that will probably have more than one advisor, that has lots of different kinds of activities, and whose capacity will be greater to engage greater number of people. We want to make sure that we're focused on students, and so working with reputable agents is very important to us. So the NACAC Code of Ethics and AIRC's system as an example of how people can look at what constitutes a reputable agent they're very important examples, and that we are certainly looking at and harking to as we make this change and try to say we can do better in engaging more widely around the world and empowering U.S. higher education as they reach out. The fact, as Lindsay said, simply the fact that so many schools are using agents is an important part of this. I want to make clear that we are not advocating for or against the use of agents either way. That is something for schools to decide, right? And what we are saying is that we want to cooperate with everybody who is reputable and who is applying ethical standards in recruiting students, and that we want to make sure that they have as much as our network can do to support them, of course, in cooperation with our colleagues at the Department of Commerce, with whom we work so closely and positively around the world in promoting U.S. higher education. I would say that maybe the last point is to say that there may be some difference in fee registration. We have a few things we need to work out. That will basically fall to centers to make decisions again about what their capacity is. Many of our events are already fully subscribed to. But one thing that I think will help everybody who is engaged in this, in promoting U.S. higher education, is the fact that we have now placed all of our guidance on recruiting international students in the public domain. So everybody now has access to the Education USA Global Guide, which is a statement that we put out every year. It's a detailed guide. You can download it in whole or in part, which talks about how to recruit in different parts of the world and in specific countries. It has tips, it has advice, it talks about foreign government scholarship programs, lots of good things, and we attempt to update that information periodically. We also do student mobility facts and figures, fact sheets, on every country of the world that are also on our website. Again, so country by country, you can look at what are issues we think any school that is interested in recruiting internationally should take into account and should look at, and those are completely free and available to the public. Likewise, we do webinars. We do 12 webinars a year that are focused on U.S. higher education, so to make sure that you have access to what we are doing, what we're thinking. We feature our REACs, our Regional Educational Advising coordinators that are based around the world in those webinars, along with professional Education USA program officers based in Washington who know the world of higher education and promoting U.S. higher education in the countries they cover overseas. We have a monthly newsletter that all can subscribe to, and I recommend our website as a great source of information for schools that are trying to promote themselves. And this is something that, of course, will remain something that is linked to schools, to accredited colleges and universities. You can post any opportunity you have for international students on the website and make it as specific as possible. So, for example, if you have a tuition waiver agreement with a specific state in Mexico, you could link it to that. You can be specific to a country or a place, and so we're hoping that this is a very practical way for schools to get information to students and to others who are promoting U.S. higher education. Scholarships, lots of different possibilities. In that spirit, of course, the fact that the United States Department of State funds the Open Doors report is an important part of this whole scenario for us. We want everybody to have the information they need to plan recruitment, to see which areas are growing, who's doing what, and part of that is transparency in information and as much information as possible. So I hope that you'll look at our website and at all the materials that are there. It's clear that solutions for the current global environment have to be flexible. We need a whole of agency approach within the government, a whole of government approach. The Departments of State, Commerce, and Education are closely aligned in promoting U.S. higher education. We just had a high-level meeting last week at which senior representatives from all three departments spoke at the Department of State. But we also know we have to work hand in hand with U.S. colleges and universities, associations, and state consortia. For Education USA, that should go without saying, as well as a broad array of reputable recruitment professionals, and make sure that our embassies are in a position to engage on that level. To go back to the point that we hope that more schools will host international students or increase their numbers, Education USA has begun a series of seminars around the country, the first of which was held January 25th at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, with a lot of support from associations and from the whole sector, whose purpose was to make sure that schools have the information they need to recruit and to reach schools that may not be hosting but could be potential hosts for international students. So to make sure that we're increasing beyond that 300, beyond 600, 900, to get to potentially to the full 4,700 accredited institutions that could be hosting international students. We will continue those seminars throughout the country, hitting all regions and hopefully eventually all states, because we are convinced that at Education USA we can not just make sure that students find schools, but that we're doing the other the other part of our work, which is to make sure that schools have the vehicles and the knowledge to be able to reach out overseas and recruit successfully.
Great. Thank you, Fred. Also, we have one more slide we'd like to include. The U.S. Commercial Service was not able to join us today, but they are going to be here for our next webinar, Webinar 2, which we'll talk about in just a minute. But they did provide this slide, basically saying that their overall goal is to increase the number of international students that come to the United States. And at the U.S. Commercial Service, they understand there's much to be done. They look forward to their collaboration with EducationUSA and all other U.S. government agencies as they complement one another's services to achieve that goal. So with that, I would like to comment that we are taking questions now, so if you can type your questions at the bottom of the chat box, Michael Sisson will help us corral those questions and we can ask them to our presenters. And thank you again to them and to the participants as well for listening in. I will say that commitment of EducationUSA to the seminars that they're doing around the country is very true. They held that first seminar in Madison, Wisconsin at approximately minus 14-degree temperatures in the middle of the government shutdown, so they were truly committed to that. So, any questions? Let's see what we've got here.
No questions as of yet, Julia, but we'll give people...
Okay. And apologies for the feedback. I'm not sure what that is, except to say we are...
I think it's something to do with our phone line internally here, and if we could do something about it, but you know, maybe using a cell phone would have been our best bet, but that would have meant interrupting the audio.
All right. Is there a link to part 2 of this registration? Yes. Once you've registered for the webinar, and let's go on and talk about a few of these things, you will get an email, and included in that is an email and a link to the upcoming webinar that we're going to do on Tuesday, March 12th, same time, 2 o'clock. And that really will be an opportunity for AACRAO to facilitate a discussion between the U.S. Commercial Service and EducationUSA, and to go into more specifics about how each agency supports U.S. higher education and their policies on working with agents. So you will get that, and you will also get some links to some other upcoming events that AACRAO is doing. AACRAO is hosting another On the Road. We're heading to Florida International University in Miami with modules that will include Registrar 101 and FERPA, International Admissions and Credential Basics, Strategic Enrollment Management, and the Admissions Leadership Academy. And finally, we have our annual meeting coming up at the end of March. So we begin March 31st. And there we will also have an international pre-conference workshop as well as many, many, many sessions available to you. And we hope that we will see you in LA. Okay, let's take a look. Any questions? Yes, hopefully Webinar 2 will not have the feedback. It looks like we don't have too many questions. I see somebody typing. Let's give them a minute.
Anna has
Talk a little bit about the EducationUSA seminars, the topics, the registration info. Fred, I'll let you take that.
Okay, thank you. So, yeah, we are very excited about this, and I'd like to thank everybody who that presented and was part of it. AACRAO, everybody's support was fantastic. NACAC, AIRC, NAFSA. So what we aim to do is in one day, and of course it's not perfect because it's a lot to fit into one day, is to paint the landscape of how to recruit and what the issues are in hosting international students. The end goal is to get schools that don't host to think about hosting, and to get schools who do host to help those schools. So we're trying to promote thinking as a country and as a sector in order to increase the number of schools that can host international students. We know that, of course, it's a competitive market. Everybody is, of course, has their own programs. But we also think that as a country, it's important for us to come together as a sector to say, we can promote U.S. higher education as a whole. That's the whole ethos behind Education USA. And for us to do that better, we can talk about our resources. We had the commercial service there, of course, to speak about their resources, their programs. We had DHS there to speak about what SEVIS is, how it works. So, for example, we aim mostly to be looking at, schools that could either really develop their recruitment and need to think about how, or schools that don't host and would like to. Part of the challenge is, of course, identifying those schools that don't host and engaging them. And we think that without the sector working on toward that goal as a whole, it'll be very difficult to make that move because all of us need to think about this. We don't all know who these institutions are, but between us as a sector, we feel that we can do this, and the way to do this is together through these seminars. So we've had great interest from many state consortia. We reached out to state consortia a while ago to say, how can we develop what we do for you in terms of how you leverage resources for your members, how you help each other. We're very eager to fit in any way we can. And so while the next event has not been scheduled yet, it will take place. So the first one was in the upper Midwest in Wisconsin for 6 states, for Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and Michigan. The next one will be, I hope, in the spring or early summer in a completely different part of the country, again, hosted in partnership with an institution, and then for the surrounding states. And that's the model we're going to keep going through around the country.
Okay, so it looks like there's a question about learning which U.S. institutions use agencies at the secondary and tertiary levels. And I will turn that over to Lindsay and Jennifer and see what they have to say.
This is Lindsay. To the best of my knowledge, there is not a collective list of those institutions that engage with agencies. You would have to look on a case-by-case basis. Again, eventually, based on our Code of Ethics, that does require institutions that do work with commissioned agents to provide the contact information for their agent partners, that you should easily, on a student-facing website, be able to see if an institution does work with agents, but there isn't kind of a collective list. I would suggest if you are interested in being around institutions that are or considering working with agents, you would find a good number of those that attend the AIRC conference, the annual conference. I'll let Jennifer speak to that, as well as other events like the ISAF agent matching workshops they host annually.
Yeah, this is Jennifer. You can, as I mentioned before, not every AIRC member actually already partners with agencies. Some are exploring, but if you wanted to get a feel for the type of institutions, I think sometimes it is helpful to see if there's like institutions as yours. You can travel to the AIRC website and go to our institutional member list, and also we have secondary schools are also in that list, although there's just a few of those. Also, I wanted to mention that many universities, it's not the whole university that uses agents, so it might be a division or a school. There's several schools that it's the Division of Continuing Education only, or it might be an intensive English language program, or it might be the business school, for example. So take a look at the list. You'll see some of the differences in the offerings.
Okay, and Jennifer, we have a question about, do you have a resource for creating a sound agent MOU?
Yes, we do have sample contracts, and we have sample contracts for various types of institutions. And we also have information on what you should include in a contract. And I'll give a shout out to NACAC because one of their guides also has an excellent kind of overview of what should be included in a contract. So these are not listed on my website, but if you want to write me, I'd be happy to send you some examples.
Okay, thank you. We have a question here that many of the participants have questions around the policies that individual advising centers plan to implement around allowing agencies into events, etc. Will there be an attempt to centralize those policies or put them all in one place? And I'm going to give that to Fred.
So thanks. Yes. So for EducationUSA advising centers, they will be able to work with everybody as capacity allows, and to incorporate them into relevant advising center activities. So that could be public events, information sessions, consultations. Of course, if an event is geared towards students, by definition, that's geared towards students. A lot will depend on the context of the center's work. We, of course, are not promoting businesses, right? We're not at all. We're promoting U.S. higher education. So every engagement that is sought after is going to have to be linked to promoting U.S. schools. We will certainly be looking to see that anyone who engages with us at EducationUSA is purely promoting U.S. schools, notwithstanding any other work they might be doing. We know that there are agencies that can represent schools in not just the United States but in other countries. But anything done at an EducationUSA center purely has to be in relation to U.S. higher education.
Great, thank you, Fred. So, Fred, these seminars, it was really great to go to the first one. Did they cost anything?
Thank you. That's a great question. Thank you, Julie. Yes, no, they're free, and we want them to be free because we want this to be a real resource for schools as they consider how they reach out. So we brought two of our regional educational advising coordinators, Melissa Deschamps who's based in Qatar, Karen Bauer, who's based in Dubai, and same region, close but not the same place, and Maria Mercedes Salmon, who's based in Mexico City, because we want to make sure that people understand how to use EducationUSA, and the full scope of resources that are there for free for schools to take advantage of. And I realized that in my list of thank yous, I left ACE out. They were also there contributing, and we're grateful.
Yes, they were. Okay, we have one other question, and Jennifer, we're going to see if you want to take this one. What do less well-branded institutions have to do to get the good agents to pay attention to them and to do a good job for them? Any comments on that, Jennifer?
Sure. I mean, that kind of content would be covered in a webinar on its own. In fact, we do have a webinar that's recorded, and I could provide that link again if anyone's interested. It's called Selling the Invisible, and it's case studies by 3 different institutional types of schools that a typical international student would not have heard from, and how they were able to market to students. Basically, what a school needs to do is to really look at their programs and look at their strengths and also understand the marketplace. So if you have marketable programs that international students might be interested in studying, those really are what you want to highlight in order to start to attract international students. Also, I would say if you have the opportunity to attend the AIRC conference, we have many sessions on marketing, and there's marketing companies that attend our conference that can help with kind of understanding how to bring the profile of your institution to the fore.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jennifer. All right, it is 3:06 according to my timepiece, and thank you to the presenters for staying on a little bit longer and answering questions. I know we started a little bit late. And I want to thank you all for joining us. I do hope you will come and join us in 3 weeks for our next webinar, Webinar 2 in this series. And we appreciate you being here today. And thank you very much to our presenters for taking the time and sharing their expertise with us. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.